And that was kind of my first wake up call that, I was too unathletic for the sport that I was doing. I was trying to rely on, I call it just like a genetic gift. I was always able to throw things hard and far. And I relied on that too much. I didn't prepare my body for what I was physically capable of doing as a thrower. So what I was telling myself was, even if there is only a 10% chance of coming back and throwing at 100%, I am going to make sure, I am going to be 100% sure that I am in that 10% when I come back, right? I am going to make sure that I'm part of that 10% that actually does return to full throwing ability. So mindset is just everything.
Fronts, 1-2, on the way, North Ryan.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Kova Sports Brick by Brick podcast. My name is Tejay Antone. I play for the Cincinnati Reds. I'm also a partner at Kova Sports. This is my co-host, Jeremy Kivel, former player for the Reds and also an owner at Kova Sports. We bring this podcast to you because we wanted more time with you guys. On Instagram, we're limited with time with posts and reels and couldn't always, clearly convey our thoughts. I think just getting together and sitting and talking and really talking through the way we think about player development is really the way to kind of explain our thoughts instead of just doing a short little Instagram reel or trying to do it through a blog post. With that being said, we have Mr. Kevin Foster today. Welcome.
What's up, guys?
Kev.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So little background, Kev's actually a javelin thrower, throwing coach now. And one of the best, actually. And, we'll go into his story just a touch, and then we'll dive off the deep end. There's a lot of similarities in throwing with javelin and baseball. Some of the training, there's crossover in training. And I think it's good to just like almost compare and contrast because we're both throwing objects as hard as we can. And there is a lot of similarities. There's differences as well. And I think we both do a really good job, baseball, us, as pitching throwers. And not only just us, there's a lot of baseball throwers that follow you, Kevin, and get some of your ideas and apply it to their own training methods. And then I think you do the same thing. You watch a lot of the top baseball guys and top pitching guys and kind of take some of their their thoughts and training modalities and apply it to your training as well, which I think is super cool. And it's really awesome to see two sports kind of like coincide and, have similarities and differences. And it's fun. It's fun to be able to try something and be like, it didn't work. And then try something else, be like, wow, that actually worked way better than I expected. So let's real quick, give us a little background of like how you got into javelin throwing and then just a little bit about your career and kind of go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So I started throwing javelin in high school. My brother threw javelin before me, so that's how I discovered the sport. It's super random for a lot of guys to do it, but he got cut from the baseball team. My family, we all played baseball growing up. So, throwing was always a big part of what I've done. So I started throwing freshman year of high school throughout high school. And basically by the time I finished, I got recruited to UConn to throw Division I. And basically throughout my time at UConn, I was just kind of on a path trying to discover how to throw really far. And by the time I finished at UConn, I was throwing 72 meters was my personal best, which for guys who aren't really familiar with it, 72 meters is a high-level Division I javelin throw. It's a little bit short of what you'd have to throw to kind of make it to the professional level, but I was close enough that I wanted to continue throwing after college. So that was kind of when my javelin anatomy coaching journey started, was after I graduated. I was basically just trying to discover new ways to train. During my time at UConn, I dealt with a lot of injuries. I had 3 surgeries throughout my 5 years at UConn. And basically I just kind of figured, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? Why is injury so accepted as a part of throwing? So around that time that I graduated, there's a lot of stuff coming out from like the ATG guys, who's now knees over toes guy, and the Flexi Bowl, a lot of like strength through length stuff and joint specific training. And I just thought, this stuff is too important for throwers to ignore. It really wasn't a part of the training culture around javelin throwing, and then really baseball training too. It didn't seem like it was really a part of any athletic development. So that's kind of where everything started for me. It was really just about implementing all this new cutting edge training and bringing it into training for throwers.
Yeah, I think that you have a great point there. So yeah, and real quick, touch on what we always like. I mean, I feel like a lot of our previous podcasts have been about guys and their injuries. I mean, injuries are a very important part of the way we grow and the way we kind of change and adapt. So, what were your big injuries, and kind of touch on what was the worst and what kind of helped you learn through those?
Yeah, so the first big injury I had, I mean, all throughout high school and stuff, I was dealt with arm pain, elbow pain, shoulder pain. But the first big injury I had was a torn UCL my freshman year in college. And that was kind of my first wake up call that, I was too unathletic for the sport that I was doing. I was trying to rely on, I call it just like a genetic gift. I was always able to throw things hard and far. And I relied on that too much. I didn't prepare my body for what I was physically capable of doing as a thrower. So that was really wake up call number one. After my Tommy John surgery, throughout the rehab process, I put a huge emphasis on just strength development, very general strength development, running, still no stretching at that point, but just general athletic development. And by the time I got back to throwing, I put 6 meters onto my personal best. And that was literally my first throw back from rehab. So that was where I realized, you know what, like we focus so much on technique in javelin, but not a lot on the actual physical preparation itself. Your throw is going to be limited by your athleticism. So that was like my big lesson from that first injury, right? You can get better at throwing without throwing. Then my next 2 surgeries that I had were, I tore both labrums in both sides of my hip. So I had arthroscopic surgery to put those back together. And that was an interesting one because I couldn't move my hips at all. I basically had zero hip mobility. I had FAI, which is essentially bony overgrowth within the hip socket itself. So it really limits your range of motion through hip internal rotation. And it basically just felt like I had arthritis anytime I squatted below parallel. So for me, the big wake up call there was I had ignored mobility and flexibility and just overall movement capacity in every sense of the word throughout my entire throwing career. I would kind of make jokes about it. I kind of would write it off as, I'm just the really stiff thrower, but I still throw far. But if I could have thrown farther if I had actually addressed that. And the surgery was the big injury wake up call, but basically over my 4 years, the hip injury itself was getting worse and worse every season that I threw. And it kind of manifested in different areas of my body. I would have elbow pain one year. I threw out my back basically every year. I threw out my back, 3 times in 3 different seasons. And I would kind of look at those as isolated incidents, but I can see now in hindsight, they all related back to just my horrible range of motion in my hips, right? Because you're trying to throw without the most important link in the kinetic chain. So those are really like the 3 big injuries that I had, but throwing, you're dealing with aches and pains, all the time. And I can just see now looking back and in general in throwing culture, the way that we handle injuries and the way that we try to prevent injuries, we just do a lot of things really haphazardly, right? We don't prepare for the demands of throwing. We'll slap ice on your elbows after a throwing session, and nobody really questions it. So that's kind of what I've been digging into after my 5 years of javelin throwing in college.
Nice. There was a time I remember you like fell, I guess, and like you were like on a rock or something, and you like fell and hit your shoulder, and you injured your shoulder again. I think that's whenever I started talking to you more because I was throwing a lot. Obviously, I have a torn UCL, and I talked to you, back and forth for a day or whatever. And that's when I discovered some of, Dr. Tommy John's implements and the way that he does things. And I talked to you about it. And that honestly was an eye opener for me to hear that from you and to hear you have like a positive experience with implementing some of that stuff. Now, maybe everything that he does isn't right, but it's more of like the concepts behind how he's implementing those things. To hear that from you, I was like, okay, well, this is cool. Let me try this. And I actually ran it by TJ. And I started trying, some of the isometrics and just, increase increasing the overall capacity of whatever's injured. I'll let you expand on kind of how you rehab that little shoulder injury to come back and throw, because I remember that was pretty cool. But that was like when we first connected, and I remember trying some of that stuff, and I was able to throw, and it was really remarkable. Obviously, that was on top of doing some other stuff like training with Grant Fowler, but really just getting some specific, targeted stimulus on my elbow with some of that, some isometrics and some overspeed stuff. I think that was pretty cool. But what was your kind of experience with that? I think that opened your eyes to, deeper level of rehab as well, on top of all the other experience that you had.
Yeah. So just as a little bit of context, that injury was completely non-javelin related. I was on a walk at the beach with my girlfriend.
Yeah.
I stepped on a wet rock and I slipped and I fell right on my shoulder. Basically, it was right in the position where people have dislocated their shoulder falling like that. And in the moment that it happened, I heard like a pop, a click. It was really painful in the moment, but I was like 99% sure over the course of the next few days after that I tore my labrum. That was right when I was getting into a lot of Dr. Tommy John stuff, which essentially what he talks about is when you injure yourself, what matters the most is your experience of the injury itself. It's what range of motion do I have? What does the pain feel like? Where is the pain? And basically just how can you move your joint around the injury? And so when I injured myself in that moment, I looked at it as an opportunity to basically have skin in the game in the rehab process. And over the course of probably about 6 weeks, I was able to kind of get my shoulder back from literally zero range of motion. I couldn't even lift my arm up to parallel to being able to basically throw again. I would say I got myself to like 80 to 85% recovered. And I did that just through a lot of movement. I moved my joint through the range of motion that I had available on any given day for hundreds and hundreds of reps. The way that I was looking at it was I injured my joint by putting more force into it than it could handle. Obviously, I slipped and fell on a wet rock really hard. Of course I did. So how can I put an equal amount of stimulus back into the shoulder in order to basically balance out what injured it in the first place? How can I get my shoulder to a point where it could handle the stimulus that happened when I fell? And obviously when it's injured, you can't load it a lot. So you have to put stress into it in different ways. And that essentially comes down to just putting in a ton of volume and doing it consistently, doing it daily, doing it just being super disciplined with it on a day-to-day basis and just regaining a little bit of range of motion every day over the course of a few months. You'll get it back to a point where you have, the range of motion that you could throw with. So that was really a cool experience for me. Getting it back from like 85% to 100% was a little bit different than the process of just kind of moving it. I used a lot of red light. I used red light therapy on it on a daily basis. That helped accelerate the recovery. But in order to get it from 85 to 100%, it required a lot more specific joint strengthening. So that was kind of more, I started working with Grant Fowler and doing his weight training program. And that involved just a lot of really specific shoulder rotation strengthening, basically getting the shoulder into the range of motion that I injured it in and slowly accumulating load and stress in those positions where it's most vulnerable.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's like stage 2. Stage 2 rehab.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Essentially.
You didn't have surgery with that, right? You didn't have surgery?
No, I never even went to see a doctor, and I'm at a point now where I can throw pain-free. So I thought that was like a cool victory, like within that whole situation. I couldn't do another surgery. I mentally, emotionally would just really oppose the whole idea.
I feel that on a deep philosophical level. I do, and I'm sure Kivel does too. I was just thinking about that the other night. I was like, man, if I had to have a third Tommy John surgery, I don't know what I would do. It's I don't want to say it's easy on the first one to like have an optimistic view. It's like, oh, other people have returned from this. I can return from this. Like, let's do it. And then the second one, you're like, okay, like this is going to be a grind, but I'm going to do it. I have to do it. And like, if you had a third one, like, gosh, I couldn't imagine, man. It's just, it's crazy that people return from those too, but that's pretty sick that you did that. And I think one of the coolest things that you said and I really love, is the fact that you have to train above the demands of the injury. So the injury, was at a certain threshold that your body was not able to handle. And that's why the injury happened. So now how do we build the body up to prevent that from happening and to train above the demands of said injury or above the demands of the game? And something that you said was like, well, I couldn't load it. I wasn't able to load it. So I did volume. And that right there is a huge point. And I think you can use that even not being injured. Like a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to do post throw, I don't want to do this or that. It's like, you don't have to do necessarily like load your stuff up to just like be above the demands game. You could do 1,000 reps of air bicep curls, but like you are moving that joint. And I tell people all the time, like when they have Tommy John surgery and once they start getting their brace unlocked, like move it as much as possible within pain-free range, like you said, but like as much as possible. If you can move that joint, the body feeds on movement. Increases blood flow, which gives it more nutrients to that area, which helps heal it faster. You add red light to the factor, you're increasing the activation of the mitochondria at the cellular level, at all levels, skin, tissue, bone. So everything's just like speeding up. And we always try to act like red light also is like this big secret. It's like, oh, red light, no one knows about it. Like, let's keep it to ourselves. But red light is a huge help. And I think it could help a lot of people. And I know a lot of guys like on the Reds specifically that carry it with them on road trips. They put it in their bag, take it to their hotel rooms. They got the little panels. And I just think it's like, that's cool that people are starting to get away from ice and they're starting to get into movement and red light as a recovery process in their day-to-day practice, even without being injured.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome too. I think that red light's the future. I think that, right, icing is just so far, gone at this point. We've proven that it's not effective. But what I think is cool is that, right, when I fell and injured my shoulder, that was a freak accident, but throwing is just kind of like a microcosm of that scenario. So everything that I did to improve my shoulder in that time period, you can apply that as arm care after a throwing session. And it's like, how fast can you recover between sessions is ultimately what's going to let you get more reps in and improve faster and adapt faster. So it's like, it really is such a game changer, right? I don't think people should overlook this, or I don't think it can be over exaggerated in terms of the importance of, basically just diving deeper into these concepts.
Yeah. And I've seen positive results hundreds of times with guys where they're just having some bicep issues or some elbow issues or some shoulder issues. And the first place that I go is it's movement. It's like, okay, well, let's do set exercise, do it like 300 times. They look at me like sideways, like I'm crazy. And then they'll come back up to me and be like, damn, my arm feels better. I'm like, okay, that was a good start. Let's, see how it recovers. And that's like stage one, right? So that's a good place to start, especially with younger athletes. And then you were talking about stage two, trying to get a stimulus that's above the demands of the injury. Like you fell on a rock, that's a lot of force. So you have to incorporate that level of force, if not more, inside of your training with, like you were saying, the joint specific exercises. I know you were probably referring to like the shoulder internal and external rotations. That's just one exercise that you can use. And then you can get into the overspeed stuff to where, you're catching your body weight from various heights, and you're trying to put force into that area through exercise and doing it at high volume. I found it hard to recreate the actual force. That's the only hang up I have on those concepts is like, how are you going to recreate the amount of force that goes through the body or a specific joint when you're throwing 100 miles an hour? I think a good supplement for that is volume. But then you can kind of go down the rabbit hole and do more of like a DAC approach where he's doing that stuff on that type of level. What are your thoughts on that as far as implementing the volume and then the high stress, high force exercise in that type of way as far as rehab goes?
So there's a couple of things you said there that I wanted to talk about. So the first thing you said was people will look at you like you have four eyes when you talk about something like this, like 300 reps. But it's like, why is that? It's because the training culture in baseball has become so deeply ingrained in bodybuilding, powerlifting, CrossFit, Olympic lifting, and there's no quote unquote baseball specific training. But to me, that is baseball specific training or javelin specific training. It's like you have to break the rules of the powerlifting and the bodybuilding because they're training for their sport, but we're training for our sport. So that's the first big thing. We have to think about the demands of our sport and how we can adapt to those demands specifically. Don't play by, the old school weight room rules. But to answer your question specifically, I think that asking how we can mimic the high forces of baseball throwing is almost the wrong question. I think that the better question is, I think the better question is, how can we better prepare our body to handle those high forces? And to me, that always comes back to having the mobility to do so. I know there's a ton of research on the subject of the forces that go through the elbow and the shoulder, and that, according to the biomechanics that the research has done, the elbow should explode every time you throw 100 miles an hour, right? The UCL is not built to handle the forces that research has shown go through it. So to me, that means that there's something else at play here, right? Because otherwise elbows would be exploding every single time they throw 100 miles an hour. And I think that there's a lot that's yet to be discovered through the fascia system and the way that range of motion, the synergy of range of motion throughout the throwing kinetic chain plays into that, like the protective mechanism. And basically, if you lack range of motion through your hips, through your spine, through your shoulder girdle, and you're still trying to throw hard, all of that force that you're putting into the baseball is being funneled straight into the elbow, straight into the shoulder. Whereas if you have that range of motion through your hips, to your spine, it kind of acts as a quote unquote shock absorber. The force is just dispersed through a longer elastic range of motion. So to me, that is like the big question is, how can we develop those adaptations in any given athlete? And then we can start talking about loading that throwing motion. But I think it's important that we talk about the range of motion first and foremost.
Yeah. Plug mobility, ability. It's on his page and we're going to plug it in at the end. But yeah, I think you have some really, really cool and smart positions on there that are like multi-level. It's working on more than one thing at a time. Like a lot of people want to sit and, do hip mobility or sit and do T-spine mobility. But like in the throwing process, it's such a sequence of events and there's so many different moving parts that it's all important. And so I think a lot of those positions you have on your mobility ability is very throwing specific and can help a lot of athletes. I would say the majority of athletes are probably too tight. Probably like 80% of guys are on the tighter side. Would you agree with that, Kiv? And then you have like people like me who are like Gumby on the other end who just move like a noodle. Yeah. But I think most guys need to be able to reach those deeper ranges of motion so that they can spread that stress out and actually allow it to be less overall stress on the body instead of trying to just throw harder and reach deeper positions in the throw.
Yeah, I think it's and Kevin, I'm sure you would agree with this. It's about combining each concept or each aspect of training. Because like you were saying, being able to, synergize or disperse the force that's being applied and then also express it in the throw. So if you're looking for performance gains, if you have more range of motion to express the force, you also have more range of motion to accept the force as well. So I think guys will get benefits on both sides in terms of health and also performance, being able to synergize and put the pieces together and hit the positions that everyone wants to hit with, all the drill videos and stuff that you see on social media. It's just an aspect that needs to be touched. But then also you need to touch the aspect of being able to actually produce force and lift heavy weight and get into deep positions in isometrics on top of being able to move in and out of ranges of motion inside of the throw. I think one of the big issues inside of baseball player development is pinpointing each thing and specifically targeting it instead of putting together a system of training to where you can kind of touch on each aspect and then maybe, per athlete favoring one over the other. Obviously, different age groups will probably benefit more from one aspect than the other. But those are some of that is the biggest issue I see inside of baseball player development. And it could even go like on a micro level in terms of like drill selection with the sport specific stuff. Like you also have to allow self-organization to occur. And the guys just need to throw whatever implement they're throwing in to learn how to organize under that task of throwing. Do you see some of the same issues inside of development in javelin as well? As far as, the baseball culture is a little bit different, obviously, but where do you see some similarities?
Yeah, so I think just to start, I think that one of the similarities between both viewpoints of training is I think javelin throwers and baseball players both love to chase weight room numbers, thinking that more strength is going to equal more power, is going to equal more throwing power. But ultimately, throwing power isn't the same as weight room power. Throwing power is going to come from relaxation and elasticity and basically energy transfer, which comes down to angles joint angles, alignment, and just the ability to capture momentum down the mound or down the runway in javelin throwing. So that's just a huge mindset shift right there, because a lot of people avoid, right, whether it's stretching or mobility or running or, whatever it is that they think is going to diminish their maximal strength. I think a lot of those things actually will contribute to throwing power. But I think what's interesting for you guys is that you guys do work with all ages, and, the programming for younger athletes is definitely going to be different than older athletes. I work primarily with, collegiate athletes and post-collegiate athletes who have been grinding in the weight room with their college track team on a NSCA driven program. And for most of the guys that I work with, they're not even close to having the mobility to get into the positions they need to. But that said, it's like you see guys with different needs, and ultimately it comes down to just being able to train your weak links in order to be at the same level as these other guys who are throwing farther than you. And, you just have to prepare every joint in your body. You have to be able to combine it into throwing. Kind of the way I approach it is when we talk about transfer of training, it's like we often talk about, the physical preparation transferring to the technical model. But we also have to look at the flip side, where it's like, what is the technical model that you're training for? Because if you transfer your training perfectly to, a suboptimal technical model, then what are you actually training for? You're training successfully to be worse at throwing. So there's a lot of different factors at play. So you have to look at both ends of the spectrum, right? The techniques, the physical preparation, and then connecting the dots between those.
How would you say, I agree with you when you say like you should train your weakest links. I think that's huge. How would you say someone finds their weak links?
Yeah, that's $1 million question, right? I think ultimately it comes down to either one, an assessment from somebody like you guys who you can go to in person and, have a full breakdown of mechanics and take a no stone unturned approach to the weight room. But kind of the way that I like to approach it is, honestly, in terms of strength training, it's like there's no harm in getting stronger across the board, as long as you're doing a program that is specifically for throwers, right? So if you take a no stone unturned approach in the weight room, you're going to hit your weakest link simply by design. Just get stronger. As far as mobility goes, it's like most athletes are going to have the same weak links there, because everybody sits too much, everybody's on their phone too much, right? The odds are that you need more hip mobility and you need more spine mobility. And if you don't, then you'll know right away simply by, just testing certain positions. It's like, can you get in that position down the mound? Yes or no? It's like, you'll know. So I think that it's important to attack your weak links. I don't know necessarily how important it is to specifically individualize a program around them, because I think that everybody needs a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And that was something I learned from Grant when he came down. One thing that he always said a lot was the best program for you is the program you're not doing. And I thought that was just so clever and smart, because it's true. It's like the program you're on, your body adapts to it. And then the body adapts. And then what does it not adapt to? It doesn't adapt to what you're not doing. I know I kind of said that with a lot of negatives in there, but if you're not doing something, your body's not adapting to that, which is nothing. So
right.
What I'm trying to say is your weak links are almost what you're not doing. If you're not doing mobility, that's probably your weak link. If you're not doing overhead strength work, that's probably what you're lacking in. And yeah, so I think that's a really good point. And I think, weaknesses are very important. So let's go on the flip side. What do you think, because you worked with a ton of guys and we've worked with a ton of guys, what do you see the outliers, like the dudes that are the best? Like what kind of qualities do you see in those guys, and what makes them so good at throwing things?
Yeah. So there's going to be two big ones in javelin. The first is just having a lifetime of throwing, right? This is something that I've really started to notice in the discrepancy of the guys who are at the highest level and the guys who are struggling. Even though they're doing quote unquote everything right, they're still not really making progress. It's like the guys who are at that elite level already, they grew up playing baseball. They grew up being the quarterback in touch football. They grew up just throwing things all the time. And so they have that awesome layback position. They have the relaxation. They have that motor control through the throwing pattern. And the guys who are at that lower level, who are training their butts off, doing all the same stuff, they just don't have the reps yet because they missed out on thousands and thousands, maybe millions of throwing reps throughout their lifetime. So if you're that guy who's trying to throw javelin now, but has never played baseball, never played football, just has not thrown enough, that has to be your priority. So a lifetime of throwing that's easily the number one factor in the elite guys. The second big factor is kind of irrelevant to baseball probably, but just being really light and springy on your feet. That's very underrated because javelin, it's not just throwing, you're running 30 meters down the runway. And the faster you are, the more energy you have going into the throw. And then it's ultimately the best throwers are the ones who can funnel that speed, rhythm, and acceleration into that awesome laid back position that they have from a lifetime of throwing.
You'd say majority of the Olympic throwers, like, best thrower from every country, would you say the majority of them are like smaller dudes compared to like jacked big dudes?
It's honestly, it varies a ton. So the guy who has the world record is 6'1", 190 pounds. And the guy who almost broke his world record last year is 6'3", 230 pounds of pure muscle. So the guy who has the world record, you wouldn't even recognize him as an athlete walking down the street. And the guy who almost broke the world record, the number one thrower in the world right now, you would think he was like a bodybuilder walking down the street. So it's really tough. It's tough to say. I don't think that it really matters. I think both guys can be successful. They'll just have different throwing styles.
Is that Vetters guy?
Yeah, Vetter. Yeah, everybody
Vetters,
sees his
I think.
training videos now.
That dude's a monster.
Yeah,
he's a monster. But I think that the point that you just made, as far as like just the overall throwing volume from an early age, like the like you said, probably millions of reps. Like myself, like I played quarterback. I was throwing wiffle balls in my front yard at 8 years old as hard as I can. It's like you can't beat that. And I want the guys that come into Kova Sports to hear this, because they're always coming in like, hey, fix me right now. Like, what can I do to gain 5 miles an hour? And it's like, it's just not going to work that way. Like, you just need to show up and throw. Like, that's it. Let's just start there. And then once, like, it's like, for example, like think about my left shoulder, the external rotation that I have in my left shoulder compared to my right shoulder. I haven't thrown with my left hand, so it's the same thing for a guy that is right-handed that just has half the amount of throws. My body has made the adaptations necessary to be a proficient in that environment, right? So just throw, like, just start there. And then, like you said, incorporate all the other little pieces and let time do its thing. It's not going to be an overnight success. It's going to be like, hey, show up and put the work in. I think that's the main thing I want the guys to hear, because I really do wish everyone could come in and gain 10 miles an hour, but it doesn't always work that way. You got to just show up and be consistent and get the volume of throwing in and prepare the body to actually be able to get set amount of volume in. What you're throwing 5 or 6 days a week. That's the biggest thing for me.
Yeah. Kiv, same question to you though. What are some of the qualities that you see in elite throwers?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is going to be similar. Most guys that throw hard are very springy and athletic, but also at the same time, you see guys that are springy and athletic that don't move very well inside of the throw, and they're not very good. And then you also have, I think probably more so in baseball, the bigger, stronger guys can still be successful because they can use that momentum in that short period of time and carry 240 pounds and not have to really coordinate or stabilize under a super high speed, like if you were doing a run up in javelin. So I think a lot of the qualities will be the same. They have, at least an adequate amount of mobility. They're very explosive and springy. And then also, like, mindset wise too, like they're just dogs. Like they can hit that switch and turn it on and go. And that's another quality that we really try to train with guys at Kova too, is like, you can do this right and that right and this right and this right. But when it comes time to go, can you get on the mound and throw the absolute crap out of it and be confident? Same thing with javelin throwers. It's like, you can do all the training, but can you grab the javelin, sprint however long it is, and just let it eat and enjoy that? Because if you can't do that, you're not going to be very good anyways. But I think qualities is in terms of like just their body, it's gonna be an adequate amount of mobility. Some guys can get away with it without not having crazy amounts of it, but it's got to be mobile in the right spots, like the shoulder and the hips, the spine, especially specific like with hip internal rotation and T-spine extension, like they have to really be able to do those things. That's why we try to incorporate a lot of that stuff and pre-throwing stuff and in the weight room as well. But yeah, I think a lot of it's going to be similar. Throwing is throwing. The environment might change, but you're going to need roughly the same qualities, whether it's javelin or baseball. I mean, Kevin came in and hadn't thrown a baseball in I don't know how long and just ripped a 91. I remember that.
91. Yeah, that was sick.
That was fun.
That was like solidified, like throwing. Like you did play baseball, but like it had been a minute since you've thrown like a 5-ounce round ball, like so. But you could just pick it up and throw it because
shoulder injury too.
And that got me fired up because you had rehabbed and put the reps and the time in, done all the work for that, and you were able to just pick up a ball and like, hey, my body can do anything, and just rip a 91. That was sick.
And the most like javelin run up too. I loved it. We have it on video somewhere. It's on our Instagram page. It was on there for sure. I also real quick, I want to touch on, I think it's funny that you have in baseball, at least you have a CC Sabathia, it's like 6'4", like 280 pounds. And then you have, Jacob deGrom, who looks like he's 160 pounds, and they're both like elite throwers. And I think baseball can err a little bit more in terms of body comp and like what the body actually looks like. There's a little bit more lenience, I feel like, compared to probably javelin. But those guys are still elite movers and they can sync it up.
Yeah.
And that's what really matters, is like hitting the positions at the right time and leveraging what you do have to produce those really high forces and, repeatability. Javelin's, it opens up quite wide, doesn't it? It's like what, 40, 50, 60 yards wide.
Yeah.
So, we're 60 feet away trying to hit a little 12-inch box, a little 17-inch box.
Yeah. But on the baseball side, some guys, the other aspect that javelin doesn't have is like pitch type, pitch design, throwing different pitches that move different ways. Some guy might not be an elite mover. He might be a small dude and he just somehow spins the ball and makes it move a ton and throws it, at an adequate velocity. And he can just have success inside of the sport because that's super specific with baseball. Like if the ball moves a lot and it's hard, like it's hard for hitters to hit. So that's another aspect that we have that javelin may not have. I'm sure that you guys work on how the javelin comes out of your hand and how it spins and travels. But the degree of that in baseball is just super high because of all the different pitch types and different things of that nature, as far as, throwing a curveball, throwing a slider, throwing a changeup, throwing a splitter, and trying to figure out which pitch you might throw better and all that stuff. So I think that's something that you won't get on the javelin side, but at the end of the day, it's throw it hard.
Yeah.
Let's wrap this thing up. Okay, we got one more question for you. So we already kind of touched on this, but if you had to like talk to one, you had a kid and he was coming back from an injury, what are like the top 2 things you would tell him to do?
That's a good question, man. That, I think the first big thing that I would tell anybody is just like, if you get injured, like it's possible to come back. Like you got to have that mentality from the get-go, right? There's nothing that's going to stop you besides yourself. And one of my favorite ideas that I was kind of using to come back from, really all my injuries, but the shoulder one especially, was like the labrum is so important for throwers, right? And there's so many stories of throwers injuring their labrum and never getting back to throwing at the level that they were at. So what I was telling myself was, even if there is only a 10% chance of coming back and throwing at 100%, I am going to make sure, I am going to be 100% sure that I am in that 10% when I come back, right? I am going to make sure that I'm part of that 10% that actually does return to full throwing ability. So mindset is just everything, right? Find a way to be grateful for your injury. Find a way to get better at throwing without throwing. Right? When you get injured, you've got to be approaching all of the things that led up to the injury. Find your weak links to the thrower that you can work on that don't involve getting on the mound or going down the runway. Right? But there's always opportunity to recover fully, and there's always opportunity to get better at throwing through injury.
That's awesome, man.
100% agree too. There's a lot of guys that come into rehab every day and they're just like, ugh. And it's like, dude, you got to enjoy this. I know it sucks, but like, you got to like make something out of it. Cause if you're going to your mindset is everything. If you don't go into it, just like, I'm going to crush this, I'm going to be the one, I'm going to come back throwing harder, then it's just going to crush you. It'll crush you so fast. And so, but yeah, I think that has been great, man. And I don't want to take up your whole Saturday. It's been so wonderful to talk to you and see your face again, man. We need to come. You need to come back out to Kova and do some more pull downs. I bet you got 95 in the tank.
No, for sure, man. I would love to.
Let's go.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. So I'm gonna plug for you Javelin Anatomy on Instagram. It's great follow. Really, really thoughtful topics. Really thoughtful skill stuff. I mean, just really, really cool. Let me go through this. Oh, look, you have a baseball performance summit on here. What is that?
Tell us about that. That was Zach DeCant put that on. It's awesome. Like, I forget how many coaches it is now.
Oh, okay. It's just
like 15 of the best coaches in baseball strength and conditioning put on awesome presentations. Like, you should definitely check that out.
Yeah. I actually, so my freshman year, I went to TCU. So I worked with Zach. He was a head baseball guy then. So it was cool to like have him right off the bat. Just in the fall. So I got there in August and then till December, I came in at 205, 19% body fat. And then in December, I was 215, 16% body fat.
Man, that's awesome.
So I weighed more with less body fat. So Zach knows what he's doing. Really, really, really good stuff over there. Love Zach DeCant. Mobility ability, man. Check that out. If you're lacking in mobility and whichever one is, and you just need some guidance on like, what should I do? Should I just go on YouTube and look up hip mobility? Like, no, like have some guidance and actually know what you're doing and actually have a plan going forward. And I think Mobility Ability does a really good job on that. That's on his Linktree profile on his Instagram. So you guys can check that out. Also check out our Linktree profile. We have some cool guides on there, like an in-season throwers guide. Oh, a hitting guide. We have a 6-week bat speed course. And Kiv, you got anything you want to close with?
No, man. I just really appreciate Kevin coming on and dropping some knowledge on us. And hopefully somebody out there listens to this and gets something from it and improves as a player or as a person in general. So just want to say thanks, Kev.
Yeah, Kev.
Yeah.
Kev, you want to say anything?
No, I just appreciate you guys having me on. But, I think there's a lot of good stuff here. And between the two of our pages, I think people can learn a lot. So definitely get on that.
Get on the train, baby.
All right, let's close it off. Thank you guys for coming. I'll see you guys later.
All right.